Welcome to the Aboriginal channel. On this episode, we're going to learn what a colony was. So right here, I'm going to read a little bit from this book right here called White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America. So it says right here, in the 17th and 18th centuries, more than 300,000 white people were shipped to America as slaves. Now, this video is not about the slave thing right now. I'm going to do another video about that. But right now, I want to talk about the colonies so we understand what a colony even was. So, right here on page 45 from that book, it's basically talking about in the early 1600s how the colony was going. It says there had been another death too. This was the news that really gripped the colony. Sir John Poopham had died. The org was no more. No retribution for failure awaited them on the quay at Plymouth. Everybody could now go home, and everybody did. The Poopham colony decamped for England in mass, leaving the fort to decay. So the colony was a fort. Right here on page 60 of that same book, it's talking about, again, Jamestown. As food supplies again ran out in Jamestown, the starving time had set in. Just how bad it was will always be unclear. A rush of self-serving and contradictory reports muddied the waters then and forever. What is certain is that when the survivors of the sea venture finally arrived at Jamestown from Bermuda, they found a ghost town. Behind the palisades, there were broken down dwellings, a ruined church, and filthy, rubble strewn streets. So the palisades were the log walls. The palisade means a wall. So when the colonizers came, they didn't just go to the Aboriginals' towns behind their walls and live with them. They made their own walls in close proximity to the whatever tribe they were trading with. So these colonies slash forts started off as trading posts, but they were also the slave plantations for the white people coming from Europe. And we'll get into that in another video. Right now, we're learning about what a colony was. It was a fort. And I'm going to point out one other thing about what they said about it so we understand what the colony or the fort was to the people in Europe. It says right here, in Jamestown, there was nothing to applaud. When Sir Thomas Gates and Sir George Somers and the other survivors of the sea venture finally made the Jamestown settlement in 1610, they found that the colony marketed as an earthly paradise by Sir Thomas Smith was more akin to hell. So the colony or the fort was more akin to hell. On page 67 of that same book, it says, from the English behind the palisades along the James River, life continued to be grim. An unflattering but not necessarily wholly inaccurate picture of life in Jamestown was drawn by a Spaniard who was held prisoner there between 1613 and 1614. So the colony slash fort slash hell was also considered to be a prison for another European. That's what a colony was in the 1600s. Now, when we go to the 1700s, the late 1700s, you will find Fort Boonesborough right here, the log fort. See, with the walls, these some make-believe walls, but they had their own log forts, and those were the colonies or the slave plantations for the Europeans. Now, if we go back, it says Fort Boonesborough was a frontier fort in Kentucky, founded by Daniel Boone and his men following their crossing of the Kentucky River in April 1775. Okay, 1774, there was what was called the Lord Dunmores War right here. It says it was Lord Dunmores War was a 1774 conflict between the colony of Virginia and the Shawnee and Mingo American Indian nations. Okay, the conflict resulted from escalating violence between white settlers who, in accordance with previous treaties, were exploring and moving into land south of the Ohio River, which was modern West Virginia, southwestern Pennsylvania, and Kentucky. So there was a war going on with Indians and these Europeans in the midst of this dude the next year building this fort in Kentucky. It was a colony. A colony is a fort. And to the Indians, it's where they went to trade with the Europeans. But it eventually became an Indian agency where they sent out agents among the Indians to do reconnaissance. It became a military training camp and a command center in the midst of the wars with Indians. And those same so-called European slaves were trained and militarized and sent out to fight the Indians, which we'll get to that when I do the slave video. But understand what these colonies were. They were forts. That's why you see fort this, fort that. Okay, so they depended on the forts to survive. They could not live out in the open until after many of these wars, particularly the Civil War. But right here is the Texas Research Outline. It gives you a bunch of information about the counties in the state. So this is Texas. So I'm just going to go through a few and just read some stuff off to confirm what I'm saying about these forts. Right here at Bell County, it says Bell County was created and organized in 1850. Settlement abandoned and resettled several times due to Indian troubles. Right here at Cameron County, it says Cameron County was created in 1848. By 1761, Spanish ranches were established. In 1845, Fort Brown was established and Anglo-Americans came to the area. So they had to establish a fort before the Anglos could come. Right here at Chambers County, it says Chambers County was created and organized in 1858. The first permanent settlement began in 1821 when the Spanish established a fortress at Anahuac and allowed American colonists to enter. Understand, a colony is a fort, or in this instance, is a Spanish fortress. Right here at Coryell County, says it was created and organized in 1854. Fort Gate, established in 1849 to protect the settlers. And this is Texas, right after Texas became a state in 1845. They were still needing to build forts because of Indian troubles. Right here at Hill County, says created and organized in 1853. It says settlements occurred after the establishment of Fort Graham in 1848. Right here at Jones County, it was created in 1858. It says the earliest settlement occurred in 1851 with the establishment of Fort Phantom Hill, which was abandoned in 1854 and reestablished in 1872. Now, you know why it was abandoned and then reestablished after the Civil War, right? I ain't got to tell you that, right? Right here at Kinney County, created in 1850 and organized in 1872, but right here it says first settlement in 1834 was abandoned until the establishment of Fort Clark in 1852. LaSalle County says it was created in 1858 and organized in 1880. The first Anglo-American settlement came with the establishment of Fort Ewell in 1852. This is another image I found right here, Fort Boonesborough. See how they have the log forts, the log walls, palisade walls all around? This is a classic European colonizing fort right here. And this was a colony. Then when you go over and look at a map of the 13 colonies, it says the original 13 colonies. Then it says Virginia, 1607. So it has the whole state of Virginia basically right here being represented as the Virginia colony. But really it was a small little fort right here called Jamestown. You look up Jamestown on Wikipedia, says Jamestown settlement in the colony of Virginia was the first permanent English settlement in the Americas. It was located on the northeast bank of the Powhatan River. Now, most of all these forts were built on the river because they needed the waterway to bring goods and slaves. It says it was established by the Virginia Company of London as James Fort. But right here is something interesting. It says a fort in 1607, but a town in 1619. Now let's go over and look at a fort that became a borough. So right here it says King's Fort. It's in Texas. An early frontier fort of the Republic of Texas, King's Fort was built in June of 1840 by a surveyor party led by Warren A. Ferris, then Nacogdoches County Surveyor. Dr. William P. King of Mississippi financed the expedition and accompanied Ferris. Because the fort was located on a favorite hunting ground for area Indians, settlement was delayed several years by fear of attacks. The fort, with its 4 cabins and a stockade, was used primarily as a way station and a place of refuge for travelers. William King continued his efforts to lure settlers to the area, buying area land until shortly before his death in 1841. When Charles F. Mercer's colonists began to arrive in the vicinity between 1844 and 1846, King's Fort became the center of a dispersed community known as Kingsborough. So they changed it from King's Fort to Kingsborough. Borough means the same thing as burg, a dwelling or dwellings within a fortified enclosure. Now, when I look at this, I think about the man wanted to lure other Europeans to the area. So in order to do that, he called the place a fort so the people would know that it was fortified. And then when the name changed to borough, the people also knew it was fortified as well because the name borough means a fortified enclosure, dwellings within a fortified enclosure. But what would make this man want to build a fort or even give him the idea in his brain that he can come and build a fort on an Indian hunting ground in the first place? Well, right before 1840, you had what was called the Texas Revolution. It says the Texas Revolution from 1835 to 1836 was a rebellion of colonists from the United States and Tejanos, Hispanic Texans, in putting up armed resistance to the centralist government of Mexico. Now, the only people they needed to resist in the state of Texas were the Indians, because he said right here that the fort was delayed because of fear of attacks. Now, when you go look at the list of Indian massacres in North America, right around that time, you have the Fort Parker Massacre. See the fort right there with the little walls? It says Comanche killed 7 European Americans in Limestone County, Texas. 5 captured included Cynthia Ann Parker. And down here it says the Kilo Massacre in 1838. A party of Cherokee massacred 18 members and relatives of the Kilo family in Texas. Then in 1838 or 1839, the Webster Massacre. It says the Comanche killed a party of settlers attempting to ford the Bushy Creek near present-day Leander, Texas. All of the Anglo men were killed, and Miss Webster and her 2 children were captured. And then it says the Council House Massacre occurred in 1840 in Texas. The 12 leaders of a Comanche delegation were shot in San Antonio, Texas, while trying to escape the local jail. 23 others, including 5 women and children, were killed in or around the city. 65 Comanche, including 35 women and children, were present. 7 Texas militia were also killed at the courthouse, mostly from friendly fire. 13 captives were killed in retaliation by the Comanche. Now, if we go back and think about what was going on at the time of the Texas Revolution, where the European colonists and Hispanic Texans were fighting the so-called centralized government of the Mexico, you had the Second Seminole War going on at the same time from 1835 to 1842. And then at the same time, when we go back and look at the Indian massacres list, right around that time in 1840 in California, it was called the Clear Lake Massacre. A posse led by Mexican Salvador Vallejo massacred 150 Pomo and Wapo Indians on Clear Lake. Before that, in 1837, the Amador Massacre in California had Mexican colonists under Jose Maria Amador captured an entire rancheria of friendly Miwok Indians in Northern California and killed their 200 prisoners in 2 mass executions. Then down here in 1846, you had what was called the Palma Massacre. 11 Californios were killed by Indians at Escondido, California, leading to the Tamacula Massacre. So Mexicans and colonists were massacring and going back and forth with Indians in California, Texas, and the U.S. government were fighting Indians called Seminole Indians in Florida, all at the same time. Now, what allowed them to just take off in like the 1830s, 37, 1836 was the fact that says right here that in 1836, Connecticut-born gun manufacturer Samuel Colt received a U.S. patent for a revolver mechanism that enabled a gun to be fired multiple times without reloading. Through the history books, which has all been a lie. So therefore, if it's a lie, then what's the truth?
If it's a lie, then what's the